Well, it looks like in response to the wave election in favor of the Tories in the United Kingdom this past week, we're seeing a new push for Scottish independence. The Scottish National Party did quite well in this election, and they ended up winning 48 out of the 59 seats in Scotland. Now, of course, that is just a tiny sliver of the overall representation in Westminster. Since Scotland is so small, they don't have very many seats. I think it's 59 out of 660, is it maybe for the whole country? And so the Scots, the Scottish nationalists, I should say, or the SNP, as they are often called in shorthand, they did quite well. They are doing much better than they were in the last election. They don't seem quite so, I guess, emasculated, since the failed independence referendum is long behind them at this point. The Scottish left, which is pretty much all of Scotland, except for a few handful of folks, they seem to be coalescing around the SNP. Support for the Liberal Democrats isn't too high. I think they've got maybe 4 seats there, I want to say, after this election, and Labour's only got 1. So, I mean, the other left-wing parties are smaller in representation than the Tories. They won less seats because the Tories won 6 seats. So pretty much, Scotland has coalesced around the SNPs. Their support for them seems to be pretty ubiquitous. And apparently, Nicola Sturgeon says that the election went much better than she was expecting. I guess folks were not forecasting such a big win for the SNP. Now, this isn't their biggest win ever. Back in 2015, I believe, they had more seats. But nevertheless, just as the surge in support for the Tories seems to indicate a renewed and increased support for Brexit amongst the population, so too does this increase in support from the last election for the SNP indicate that there is a greater demand amongst the populace for Scottish independence. And it's natural that these two programs would be correlated in the way that they are, because they're by no means mutually exclusive. Brexit and Scottish independence seem to go hand in hand. The Scots overwhelmingly support staying in the European Union. I believe they voted against Brexit by a factor of 2 to 1, whereas the English, it seems to be, they're leaning much more in the Brexit direction. There seems to be clear majority support, although not as overwhelming, amongst the English for Brexit to happen. And I think that the hopes for Scottish independence really are tied to Brexit, that if it looks like Brexit's not going to happen, then I think that Scottish independence loses its luster for some people. And that doesn't mean that they don't necessarily care about the cultural implications, but what we saw in the last Scottish independence was a lot of people who were worried, older people who were worried about their pensions not being paid by the government. They were worried about losing benefits because Scotland, of course, is much poorer than England, and I haven't looked at I don't have any figures on this, but I would imagine that you have more tax money flowing into Scotland than flowing out of Scotland. But with with Project Fear and whatnot, stoking people and making them afraid of Brexit, if it looks like Brexit's going to happen, a lot of the folks who voted against independence for financial reasons before may vote in favor of it because they think that Brexit will be much worse than an independent Scotland. Now, despite all this, I'm still skeptical that Brexit will happen. I have had hope in the past. That hope has died. It has not been revived yet. Even though there is a big conservative majority now, 365 seats they won. They gained 47 over the last election. You would think that that's a pretty clear, gives Boris a pretty clear mandate to actually get Brexit done, preferably through a no-deal situation. However, the folks who stopped no-deal Brexit from happening before were the Tories. The Tory government, the folks in the Parliament, they were the ones who stopped that from happening. So I don't necessarily think that those people are going to let a no-deal Brexit happen now. I think that it's very possible that they just keep stringing the British people along and don't really ever let anything come of Brexit. And of course, Brussels is very happy doing this because it helps them send a message to the rest of Europe, to anyone else who is thinking of trying to leave the EU, that they'll put you through the ringer, and that it's just not possible, and that we'll just keep you make you keep going to vote. And until you produce the result that we want. It's just like when I believe it was either Ireland or the Netherlands originally did not ratify the Maastricht Treaty, which was the sort of the founding document of the modern EU. The EU made them go have another second referendum until they won. And of course this isn't the EU controlling the Tory party here, but it's the same people. The folks within the Tory party who want to stay in the EU, they have that same ideology. They feel a kinship with the bureaucrats in Brussels. But let's say I'm wrong. Let's say that Boris is able to actually achieve a no-deal Brexit, which is the only real Brexit, and get the United Kingdom out of the European Union, get them back under their own laws exclusively, have all their laws made in Westminster, none made in Brussels. Well, then under that case, I think that Scottish independence is all but guaranteed. It's very clear that the people in Scotland do not want that. They don't like Tories, they don't like Brexit. Well, if you have a Tory majority and then Brexit happens, well, then there's really nothing binding the Scots to the United Kingdom. They will have no loyalty at that point. They will not want to be a part of that country. And that's why I think Nicola Sturgeon is already pushing for her, trying to get the whole Indy Ref 2, is what they're calling it, the second independence referendum. Which, I can, you might say, oh, well, she's just being a sore loser. She wants to have another vote, just like what I was saying about the EU earlier, that they keep making you vote until you make the right decision. Well, in her case, I can actually see why you would want a second independence referendum, because a lot has changed since the first one. The first independence referendum came before Brexit. It was in 2014 or 2015, I think. Yeah, 2014. So a couple of years before the Brexit vote, and obviously a lot has changed in British politics since then. And so I think it's pretty clear that even if it was held at any time after the Brexit vote, that folks in Scotland would have been scared enough to vote to leave, to try and form an independent Scotland that stays within the EU. So to me, all indications would show that if you held that second referendum, that Sturgeon and her fellow independence advocates would win. Even though, if you ask me, what they're talking about is not independence, but rather they don't want to secede so much from the United Kingdom as they do want to accede to the European Union. They're very open about talking how they're happy to welcome in European laws and all that. They don't really want to be independent. They just see themselves as more European and less British. It's a sort of cultural identifier. It's kind of like how with Texas, they went from being a Mexican state to an American state. Sure, they were independent there for a little while, but they pretty much went from being Mexican to American. And that was largely for cultural reasons. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.